Hello everybody and welcome to this video. So in this one I want to talk a bit more about reverb and make you understand why as an additive layer reverb cannot replace true depth. I want to kind of explain the physics of why it doesn't work and how you can sort of cheat the system to create more depth the best way. So if I just add reverb on these little drums here. Okay, so they sound very close by default, right? Okay, what happens? So I have a hole here. Now I have lots of splashy echoes. In real life, you don't get this sort of shimmering, shimmery echoes. You know, it's just not that way. Of course, it's like different reverbs are more or less good at this, and some of them will be more splashy than others. Some of them will be more diffuse. But the thing is, any reverb won't be able to give you a perfect depth, a perfect result. And the main reason is that, of course, this is just like an additive way to add space. Some of the original signal is still going straight to the master, and you're only sending some of it here as a send. I'm only sending some extra reverb as an extra layer to try to add depth, but it doesn't take away the fact that the source is actually pretty dry sounding, and some of this source is going straight to the master. So really quickly, I'm going to highlight the differences between true depth and distance and reverb, so you will understand what true depth does compared to reverb. So the key thing to understand is that reverb here is pretty stupid. It can only produce content based on the source. So it can add an extra tail, for example, add extra content, add like a wide texture after the sound, but it doesn't transform the original signal. Reverb is just like it's a zero delay algorithm, you know, it will only produce stuff after the source based on what it heard. Whereas true depth here, which I called TD, is actually going to reshape the whole sound at the source. So if you move the mic more far away from a player, it will reshape the dynamics. And the staccatos of a trombone will be less tight and less clicky if you're more far away from the trombone compared to being right against the bell. Any violin will be more dark if it's far back in the room and very far away from the mic. And it will also change the width, of course, if you record in stereo. So all of these true depth characteristics, you know, they have to be captured with the mic or the mic positions and stuff like that. And you can also cheat, and that's the point of this video, to try to simulate more depth. But you need to understand that reverb is not magical. It's not an AI plugin. It can only create content based on what you feed it. And that's the reason why if you send a very close sound to a hole, you get a splashy sound, which is not what you would get in real life. Because of course you don't have this natural air absorption of depth of a big room. It can only produce, you know, what it knows. Now, of course, reverbs, they try to emulate air absorption. They try to sort of fight this, and that's the point of a good realistic reverb. It's to sort of mitigate this with diffusion, air absorption, good early reflections. But, you know, it's not magical. Ideally, you want to change the source to get closer to your goal. So now how can you cheat to kind of prepare the sound for a reverb? Because that's really the goal. How do you create more depth in a more natural, clean way? Now, with distance, you do lose some of the highs. You can't have super clicky highs if a sound is very far away. You will lose some of this because high frequencies, they die off quicker, they get absorbed by air more easily. So you can do this. You don't get this if a sound is very, very far away. So you try to cut it a little bit. Okay? Then you can use a limiter because if a sound is very far away, you will get less spikes in the sound because all of these spikes, these transients will be more diffused. They will be diffused naturally in the room. So here it's not even too bad. There's already a little bit of distance, I think, in this sound. But you know, it will help to get more depth if you sort of lose some of these spikes a little bit. So you can use a bit of limiter and see what happens. You know, even better, what you can do is reduce the dynamics in the highs because, of course, the highs are more absorbed, the highs are less clicky with distance. So you could use here like a multiband compressor, multiband limiter, hard knee, maximum ratio. Just try to catch those clicks, catch these little things here. Of course, not to this extent, but check this out. There you go. So it still sounds dry, but it's dry, but yet the characteristics of the sound are actually more like the characteristics of a sound that is far. So now if I send this to my reverb again, let's compare with and without these. I listen to the highs, how the highs feel. See that? We lost a lot of splashiness. It sounds a lot more realistic, a lot more coherent, basically. So we have the tail now, but the source itself kind of feels a lot more coherent. One more step you can use sometimes is more like an extra reverb in front of the hall. So I have my hall reverb here, but it could be like any long reverb. But what if a sound is pretty dry and I want to sort of prepare it? Well, you can sort of dampen it. You can diffuse it a little bit with another reverb, like a shorter room reverb, to just add extra length, add extra transient smearing, extra air absorption before you actually send it. And that's the beauty of this reverb in particular, but you can use other reverbs. But check this out. So of course, if I overdo it, it's too much. But you can see how it's sort of smearing the attacks a little bit. Right? So now if I put this in front of the send, so this is an insert, and then I send again, it will be even more sort of diffuse and far away sounding. See? Oh, yeah, see? If I push it too much, of course, it sounds weird. There is like a double transient and it's ugly. So I think that goes to show that you can't just you can't just get depth with one setting, one reverb. You need to consider the source, consider what you have and what's not right, what's kind of, in opposition to what you're trying to create. Here we have a very close, clicky sound. We can't just feed it into one reverb and expect depth. We need to first sort of get closer to how it would be if it was actually far back in the room. So think of the inserts stage as like a mic simulator. You're trying to simulate as if the sound was captured from a bigger distance. And think of the reverb send as just like sweetening. It's like the final touch to give that final feel that, okay, it's in a big room. But you need to have all the preliminary steps in order to create a realistic, believable depth. So if of course you have a big library, like a big orchestral strings library that's already in a hall, you don't need to do all these steps because it's not like it's a closed source that you need to diffuse. It's already a far away recording, so you can just skip straight to the sweetening stage, the send stage. But if you have a closed sound and you want to add depth to it, consider all of these things. Dynamics, reshape the dynamics. So you can use compression to sort of remove clickiness in short sounds. It's even like for staccatos, it's the same thing. If you have a solo violin staccato and it's like super bitey, it might be that there's too many dynamics, it's too spiky, too bitey. Reshape the tonal balance, because of course highs get absorbed with distance. Width too as well, although it's a little bit less critical because, it can depend on the mics and stuff. So mainly these two here. But yeah, keep this in mind and remember that reverb is just an extra blanket, like an extra sweetening blanket. It's not true depth. So yeah, basically, to sum it up, a reverb is a bit stupid. So if you just crank it with a source that's not adequate, that's not ready to take so much reverb, it will just create artifacts. And the mistake that many people do is that they try to get depth, but in the context of the mix, they don't feel it because when you play the whole thing, you still have this little clickiness poking through, still have these little artifacts of closeness poking through. And people try to just crank more reverb to fight that issue, but it's not really helping. It's just adding more messiness. So if you just crank the reverb without like a proper source, it will just create more noise and create more unrealistic washy noise. It's not gonna sound closer to like a proper depth. So guys, I hope it helped, and yeah, I will see you in the next video. Cheers!